welcome to The Found Cause, where we found our cause and serve the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm Michael, the man behind the machine, and to my right is...
Sebastian, the bookkeeper.
We are teeny tiny today because we are doing a response video to none other than B.S. Lewis, Big Stupid Lewis. He is a commenter of ours. On our previous Atheist response video, he said, we did 10 questions for Christians. That was pretty regally presented by our associate, Germania. Pretty reasonable atheist. B.S. Lewis said, please do my questions next. We look him up, and his channel is very well produced. It's insane and weird and blasphemous, so we're gonna handle it. The opening, if you're wondering why we're starting at 24 seconds, it's just like a bunch of weird, obscene intro stuff, so we're keeping it clean for the kids at home that don't watch us. And we're gonna handle his 10 questions. I'm gonna give you a hint. They're not quite as philosophically enthralling as Germania's, but we'll do our best to handle it.
Sure, let's do it.
All right, here we go. First of all, props to the animations.
Yeah, very good.
Get the dancing. John 3:28, gird up your loins like a man, and I will demand of thee, and answer thou me, he says. Yes, this is his proclamation, so I guess he's claiming to be God or something like that.
Making decisions can be hard sometimes. Am I right? If only there was some guidebook for life, or an objective standard we could refer to help us make good choices. Then this world would be a much better place. Well, you can stop your seeking, faithful viewer, because the objectively best channel on YouTube is here to help you gain understanding and steer you towards the straight and narrow.
It is a golden calf after all.
Putting together a short quiz based on the best...
I just want to note that he's wearing For the Bible Told Me So, and he uses the music from Apologia, which we did a response video to Apologia, and we were subjects of his For the Bible Told Me So nursery rhyme thing. So here you go. This guy's getting his cuts from Apologia as well.
Selling book of all time. So if you're ready to sharpen your biblical discernment and achieve astronomical critical insight, then let's begin.
All right.
Judging by its fruit, is this pine tree good or bad?
Now, if you see the question, you're kind of in store for the rest of the questions because they're all about this level. But of course, Matthew 7 is a parable, is where Jesus is saying you can discern good people from bad people by their fruits. And so he compares it to trees. He said, you know the tree by its fruit, and so you'll know people by their fruit. Bad trees, bad people produce bad fruit, and good people, good trees, produce good fruit. And so a pine tree is a bad tree for eating because you cannot eat. I think you can eat pine nuts, which I think come from like the budding pine cone. So I suppose some fruit of pine tree is good, but we would generally say that a pine tree is a bad tree by its fruit. So yeah. And
this is even a bad pine tree because at least from the looks of it, there's no fruit. So
yeah, where's the pine trees, man? It's not even bearing fruit. I mean, obviously this is some weird illusion like, your parable doesn't make sense, Jesus, because not all trees produce good or bad fruit. But I think what Jesus is getting at is a bad tree. So a bad cherry tree will give bad cherries, little cherries, rotting cherries, or no cherries at all. Whereas a good cherry tree will produce good cherries. So we're all the same kind of tree, that we have good trees and bad trees at the same producing. So we produce good works as our fruit, and people that don't produce good works at all, or they produce bad works, are bad. I mean, it doesn't really have to do with the genuses of tree species.
I also thought of James because you can say whatever you may want with your mouth, and if you don't have any works, any fruit, any showing fruit of the Spirit, maybe I'm just philosophizing this too much, but if you're not showing any fruit at all, you're not in Christ.
Right, like this pine tree. So thanks for the opportunity, BS.
Which of these is really a wolf dressed up in a sheep costume?
Again, he's taking a parable of Jesus from Matthew 7:15. If you see it in the bottom left corner. If you're wondering why we're in the middle of the screen, it's just because we're trying to give you both his text here, that we block a lot of stuff. Jesus says that you should watch out for false teachers because they'll come to you like wolf in sheep's clothing. And so he's saying, can you discern a wolf in sheep's clothing? I mean, yeah. These are just two sheep, but be a pretty creative wolf if he was able to get inside of a sheep like that.
Yep. And if you want some other examples of actual wolves, you can check some of the topics we have covered in our podcast, like Gnosticism, how some people say that's just a branch of Christianity. It's pretty wild. You can tell it's very different and tries to attack Christianity. So, yeah, you can tell a wolf if it's hiding under sheep's clothing.
Yeah, but it's harder to tell than if it wasn't. I don't know if B.S. Lewis is. I mean, obviously he's taking a ride here because he thinks these are just like funny ways to critique the Bible, but it's not even a way to critique the Bible. It's kind of like if I used an analogy in my supercharged political campaign speech and he didn't like my politics, and so he said, okay, when Michael says that Democrat politics are opening up a can of worms, I'll put two pictures of a can here, closed cans. Which one is a can of worms? Because you can't tell which one is a can of worms, clearly Michael is dumb. I mean, you've heard of analogies before, I'm sure, B.S. Lewis. This would be an analogy of sheep to us and wolves to false teachers.
Mm-hmm.
Can a goat use its free will to choose to become a sheep?
This is a little deeper one. Again, it's still kind of weird, but Matthew 25 here that he's quoting is where Jesus is talking about the end, the final judgment. And he's got the goats on the left and the sheep on his right. And goats are destined for hell and the sheep are destined for heaven. And many Christian apologists, we would disagree with them, but many Christian apologists would say that it's out of free will that humanity either chooses to hate God and reject him or choose him. And we would say, no. Christians choose to love God indeed, and non-Christians choose to hate God indeed, but it's not out of free will. It's out of their genuine will, but it's not out of free will. Therefore, they are born goats, and Christians are born goats as well, and they have to be born again to become one of God's sheep. And so you cannot use your free will to become a sheep. It's God who births you again.
And I think he even talks about this in some of his videos. So yeah. He gets a lot of the free will. He's been saying he gets a lot of that.
He does. I mean, we're going to get through this episode. These are kind of mundane, weird questions. I don't know why he asked us to react to this one, but might as well. It's his shortest video.
Sure.
He has one on, is Jesus really Satan? Which would be an interesting one to take. It's way more vulgar than this, and also it's like a one-shot argument, so I feel like it might be a little bit more boring. And then he had one on Adam and Eve, or is Jesus pro-abortion?
Yeah, pro-choice or pro-life.
Yeah, which touched on free will as well. In case you're not familiar with BS, and to our viewers as well, we are Calvinists, and we believe it's the consistent way to read the way salvation works and in God's timing and God's ways, and that we are born unable to choose God, and God chooses us. So we don't believe in autonomous free will. We believe in genuine will. We genuinely love God, and atheists genuinely hate God, but our wills need to be changed by God for us to love him. It's not something that's capable to us without God. We, as Christians, preach nonetheless to everybody, including you, B.S. Lewis, to come to Christ, because you don't come to Christ without some preaching. But ultimately, it's God that changes hearts, not our words.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the biblical definition of marriage, which one of these is the bride?
Yes.
I mean, if you see our facial reactions here, it's kind of like sad faces, or like, because is this what's keeping anybody from being a Christian? No, I don't even think it's anything that's shaken anybody's faith from being a Christian. You know, sometimes people bring up contradictions of like a little more legitimate being, like Judas's death, right? So they'd be like, oh, in one that he explodes, and one of them he kills himself or hangs himself. Which one is it? And we have to show how they match. But in this case, like, they definitely, this isn't even a contradiction. This is just like two different descriptions of brides in the Bible. One of them being the physical bride. So Matthew 19 is Jesus quoting the Genesis narrative to say that a man shall leave his father and mother to be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And he's talking about regular old marriage there.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ephesians 5
cites the same passage.
Yeah.
But it's also applying it to, like marriage, the church is united to Jesus. So he's using that as an analogy for the congregation to understand what our relationship to God is. And he even continues in his argument in Ephesians, like, by the way, guys, be nice to your wives. So clearly there is a connection between the two.
Yeah, and even Paul says in Ephesians 5, he says, it's a mystery, but I am talking to you about Christ and the church. And so he's not saying the passage is specifically talking about that. He's saying, I'm using this as an analogy for Christ and the church. And so there you go. Like, a regular old bride is the biblical definition of marriage. That's what regular marriage is. And then as far as the church is concerned, we are married to Christ in the spiritual way. I think that's pretty standard. I'm sure you expected that, B.S. It's just because this is not a contradiction. It's just two uses of the term marriage.
Lazarus raised from the dead. Did he die once and face the judgment?
Do you want better? There's other people that raised from the dead in the Bible, like a body is thrown in with Elisha's body and touches the holy bones of Elisha and it raises again. And so there are other people that have risen from the dead besides just Lazarus. I mean,
or that young man that fell from a window when Paul was preaching.
Yep. Or another one that Elisha himself goes and raises a widow's son from the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are some. Of course, we know rising from the dead is an exception to the regular rule of life, and that is that you die once. And so in Hebrews 9, it says that you are appointed. It's appointed for men to die once and then face judgment. That's really just a way of saying you're not going to be born again to live a whole nother life. And so Lazarus was dead for a couple days and then was risen again, but he eventually died. He lived out his regular course of life. He didn't become a different person. He didn't have reincarnation. It's appointed for men to die once and then a judgment. So Hebrews 9 stays true even in the exceptional cases of Lazarus, because Lazarus didn't live another life. He lived his same life out. Same with all the others.
Right. And not to bore our atheist viewers, there's a whole thing on the nature of what happens when you die. Christians, I would argue, go straight to heaven. People who are separated from God do not go straight to hell at the moment, because Jesus Christ has not come back yet and has not executed judgment on all humans. So therefore, since Jesus hasn't returned yet in the second coming, judgment day hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and this is described in Revelation. It's described by Paul in Thessalonians and elsewhere about Jesus going down and preaching to the dead and coming to them out of Hades. This is a biblical concept as well.
Mm-hmm.
If you dig up buried treasure, should you immediately bury it again when you find it?
B.S. Lewis might be one of those kids who didn't really make it in English class, but he's really got a thing for these parables. Like, he really wants Jesus to look dumb when he's preaching parables. But Jesus preaches a parable in Matthew 13 that says, the kingdom of God is like a man who finds treasure buried in a field. And so when he finds it, he immediately buries it again, goes and sells everything he has and buys the field with great joy. And so B.S. Lewis is saying, does it make sense that he found the treasure and then reburied it? Take a half step back and realize that the field wasn't the man's. He had to go and buy it. So if he stole the treasure from the field that wasn't his, he'd be stealing the treasure. But if he buries it again, nobody's going to know the treasure's in the field. So when he buys the field, it's not so expensive because they don't know treasure's in it. And then the treasure's his because he's bought the field. Whereas if he just stole the treasure, he'd be liable for stealing the treasure. It was actually somebody else's treasure because it was somebody else's field at the time. So, gotcha, checkmate. It's also a parable, so like, who cares? But if you care, it makes sense that he reburied it because he was going to buy the field for himself.
Mm-hmm.
If you are a child of light, should you ever sleep?
How much you take this one, Sebastian? Because it's dumb.
In this sense, in the way that Paul is describing it as being spiritually children of light, because otherwise we'd be glowing if he was literally saying we are made of light.
Mm-hmm.
And we should not, because the calling in his sermon here in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 is that we need to be alert, always seeking to do the things of God, of his kingdom, and not being lazy or neglecting that. That is what he's getting at. It's not actually talking about literal sleep, because he will conclude I believe either at 7 or 8, that we should encourage and build up one another. Clearly, we're not building up literally each other. It's more, again, it's an expression that's being used.
And in case you're unfamiliar, because this is such a weird expression here, 1 Thessalonians 5 says this, but you are not in darkness, brothers, for the day to surprise you like a thief, for that day, meaning Jesus' return. For you are all children of light, children of the day. We are not of the night or of the darkness. So then, let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. For those who sleep, sleep at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we belong to the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and the helmet for the hope of salvation. So, again, this is about the coming judgment, and so we are children of light because we know the judgment is coming, and so we're going to stay sober and awake and faithful servants. So in that case, we should not sleep, because sleeping would be to forget about Jesus and not be doing his goodwill. Now, physical sleep, of course, we should physically sleep, just like we're not physically children of light, we're physically children of our parents. Once again, I guess he doesn't like parables.
Jesus sits at the right hand of his Father. Who will God choose to sit at Jesus' left hand?
In case you're unfamiliar, John and his brother James go up to Jesus, or actually their mom goes up to Jesus and asks, please put my son at your right and your left, meaning the two highest positions of power in the kingdom, when you take over the kingdom. And Jesus rebukes her essentially and says, like, it's not mine to give. You're definitely not gonna, like, your sons aren't gonna sit at my right and my left. But what he tells her is, it's not my decision ultimately, it's the Father's. But like, he also asks them, can you bear, like, if you're gonna sit at my right and left, you have to bear the burden I'm about to. And they say, we are able. And of course they're not, because they don't go and take his kind of crucifixion death. So it could be that somebody sits at Jesus's left, but in fact, it could be that nobody sits at his left, because it could be we all sit before him, and it's him and the Father sitting before us. So, just because Jesus says it's for the Father to determine who sits in his right and his left, doesn't mean the Father has to fill his vacant left-hand seat. Mm-hmm. It could, he could have somebody there, but we don't know.
When Jesus returns, is he coming from the earth or the sky?
This one was an odd one, because
you dig deep on this one, yeah.
Yeah, because I was reading it, I'm like, where do you get the coming from the earth from? I really struggled with this one. I was like, is my English not good enough? Maybe. That's a story for another day. Do not answer that. Anyway, from Revelation 1, that's the easier one. Coming from the clouds, you'll see him, with the armies of heaven. Great. What everyone imagines the return of Christ to be like.
Yeah, and that's repeated like many more places than just Revelation 1 there.
Yes. And in Acts 1:10, that's when the apostles are summoning Jesus and he ascends to heaven. And then suddenly, two angels appear, dressed in white, and tell them, Galileans, what are you doing? The same way, I'm paraphrasing, the same way you saw Jesus leave the earth, you will see him return. So I was like, what do you mean from the earth? It was like, did Jesus is going to sprout from the ground? I did not catch that, but then I realized perhaps this might be a misunderstanding in which, because he came from the ground into heaven, he's also going to come out from the ground. I mean, that's the only thing I could conceive of that this question was trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the only place you're even going to be able to make this weird argument that, so the angels say, in the same way he'll return to the earth, clearly meaning he's going to descend from heaven like all the other places say. He just ascended to heaven, and so in the same way he's going to return. But B.S. Lewis is saying, well, he ascended to heaven from the ground. So if he returns the same way, he's going to have to ascend, not descend. And therefore, does he come from the earth? Well, whatever. I mean, the text doesn't even say he's going to ascend to earth. It says, come back, return. So again, it's just weird semantics here. It's perfectly reasonable to say that him returning the same way that he went up to heaven is him descending from the heavens. So there's no contradiction here if that's what you're getting at. But a weird one.
Mm-hmm.
Thieves steal and kill. Will Jesus do that when the day of the Lord comes like a thief in the night?
Yeah. So again, the whole analogy thing, again, missed the English class in that one, I guess, BS. Or you didn't, and you just made this waste your time. But thieves steal and kill, and this is from John 10:10, when Jesus is talking about people who he's the shepherd, and there's the sheep in the fold, and that people who aren't the shepherd enter by jumping over the gate. And thieves don't come for good purposes, right? They come only to steal and kill. I think you have this one.
Yep, I read from 7. Jesus said again, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who have come before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full.
So there you go. Jesus is knocking on thieves. Of course, thieving is bad, and you want to come in by the gate. But also, in 1 Thessalonians 5:2, Jesus, the day of the Lord, is described as coming like a thief in the night. In the same way, Jesus also describes himself. You don't have to go to 1 Thessalonians. You can just stay in the Gospels. Describes the day of the Lord coming like a thief in the night. like a thief is the optimum word here. Jesus is not a thief in the night. He comes like a thief in the night, because like a thief, you won't know when he's coming. Because again, and Jesus expressly puts this in his parable about it, which First Thessalonians is clearly quoting, referencing there, where he says, if the owner of a house knew when a thief was going to come, he would have stayed awake to get ready for that thief so that he wouldn't be robbed. He'd be able to defend against the thief and scare him away. So in the same way, we should be awake and ready, because we're children of light. I mean, just keep going with the same analogy, so that when Jesus comes, we're ready. We believe in him, we're being faithful, all the rest. So Jesus is not a thief in all aspects. He's only coming like a thief in the fact that he's unexpected. And that's the only aspect he's keeping with a thief here.
Yep.
Again, if I say, I slither like a snake, you might say that they'd like, oh, do you eat mice? Do you have scales all over your body? No, I like slither on the ground like snakes do. I don't share other aspects of snakes. I slither like the snake. Again, English class may have been hard on poor B.S.
And time. Pencils down.
We did it.
Let's see how you did. If you got all of them, or almost all of them right, you're hot.
Did any
Jesus will drink you.
No.
If you
I
got
think so.
all of them, or
Great.
almost
Again,
all
we
of
both in
them
this one.
wrong,
Okay, that's good.
you're cold.
And here he is,
Jesus will drink you.
I guess, thinking it's funny
If
that
you
Jesus
ended up
says you're hot
somewhere
and
in the
cold,
middle,
you're
From
you're
Revelation.
worth it, but
lukewarm.
yeah, if you're lukewarm, he's gonna spit you out.
Boo! Jesus will swish you around in his mouth and spit you out like a bad wine tasting.
And to this, we'll agree with Jesus' words in Revelation, and that is that if you're going to oppose God, know that you're opposing God. Be cold, because at least that way you will be faced to judgment, knowing you're going to face it. Those who think they are saved, worse for those who think they're saved, but aren't actually saved, because woe to them, right? They're the foolish virgins who didn't trim their lamps in the time, and then they arrived at the party late and they're not allowed in. Whereas if you're an enemy of God, I guess at least you get to live in you make videos like this and stuff. I mean, that's a bonus, right? So we say be hot, come to Christ. That's why we serve the Lord Jesus Christ. You have any closing comments, Sebastian?
No, I think he was trying to be cheeky about this. You can clearly see that. So, if you have any other videos, maybe some burning questions in your heart, B.S. Lewis, anything that we could also react to, I'd be curious, interested to see what are some things that either stumbled you or either think you're silly about Christianity. Understanding this is all tongue-in-cheek, that's fine. But
the whole channel is tongue-in-cheek, so it's kind of hard to discern the real objections from the not. Are these? My question for BS is, are these genuine questions that made you upset and question the veracity of the Bible, or is it just you trying to poke at Christians? Because if you're just trying, I can see it just being trying to poke at Christians and okay, whatever. But you have some genuine theories on your channel, again, like the is Jesus Satan thing. But even then, I don't think you really think that Jesus is Satan. I think you're just doing that to play Christian mind games. So if you have a legitimate criticism of the Bible, put it in the comments. But if it's just this kind of thing, this is sad atheist behavior, which is why we reacted to it, because I'm oh, it's a real commentary, requested it, and it's an example of sad atheist behavior. I would say this is below the usual level of atheist critique, but I would not put it past atheists to find this kind of video as justification for staying atheist, just like they find insane documentaries like Zeitgeist as a reason to reject Christianity, even though it's totally insane. So, as much as this is B.S. Lewis, we wanted to react to it because it is BS to point out that it's actual garbage. So don't trick people with this kind of video either. It's bad.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, super short. Thanks for listening. I've been Michael, the man behind the machine, and to my right has been
Sebastian, the bookkeeper.
And we serve the Lord Jesus Christ, where we found our cause. If you want to see the rest of our episodes, you have to go to YouTube and Facebook, where you can see our faces. You can go to podbean.com, foundcause.podbean.com to download these audio episodes. But this one's a video, so you probably want to see all of B.S. Lewis's beautiful animations. And of course, Sebastian's beautiful face. So until next time, we talk about something completely different. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.